Hey guys, tonight we drift back to the bustling heart of the Roman Empire, to the place where marble colonnades meet salt-bitten air, Ostia, Rome's great harbour. The scene glimmers with white sails, the cries of gulls and merchants sweating under the sun as they haul amphorae filled with olive oil, grain and wine. You can almost smell the tar used to seal the ship's planks, and the pungent mix of fish and spices that cling to the docks. It is a world alive with motion, yet into this lively tide slips a story that seems to fall into shadow. One treasure ship, heavy with imperial wealth and guarded by Rome's pride, glides from the harbour mouth and then quite simply vanishes. No grand farewell, no shipwreck proudly carved into record's only absence. You probably wouldn't survive the stress of being the quartermaster when that news reached the capital. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And while you're at it, post your location and the local time in the comments. I'm curious where and when you're listening from. Now find yourself a cosy seat or a soft bed, let your mind begin to unwind, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. The harbour of Ostia is Rome's heartbeat, for trade the place where Egypt's grain arrives to keep the city fed, and where luxury goods trickle in from the far corners of empire. Mainstream history records its engineering marvel artificial basins dug by order of Emperor Claudius, later improved by Trajan with enormous hexagonal docks that could shelter fleets from sudden storms. Every plank and stone whispers of Roman ambition of an empire determined to feed over 1 million citizens. Amid this controlled chaos, a single ship slipping away unnoticed should be impossible, yet rumour insists it happened laden with treasure, perhaps imperial pay for distant legions, perhaps spoils gathered from conquest. Legionaries patrol the wharves, their armour clinking as they shuffle in pairs, pretending their eyes are on the crowd, and not the tempting shimmer of goods. Traders bark prices, sailors curse the ropes that burn their palms, and scribes tally cargo on wax tablets, scratching notes that will vanish faster than ink. Into this tableau slides our ship's sleek hull, dark against the watermasts, tall as towers, sails patched but proud. Its name is lost, which only sharpens the mystery. Quirky tidbit: time ancient Romans sometimes believed that painted eyes on the prow of a ship could literally help it see its way across the seas. Imagine that a massive treasure vessel, decorated with glaring eyes, staring out to sea like a sleepless owl, ready to guide wealth across the waves. Did this particular ship have those eyes? We can't prove it, but the image is irresistible. As the vessel eases from Ostia, the Mediterranean stretches ahead like a promise and a threat. Sailors mutter prayers to Neptune, some tossing coins into the harbour water for luck. Somewhere on board, a clerk counts coins into a chest, sealing them under wax, the sound muffled by the creak of ropes. It's routine business as usual, nothing dramatic except that no record tells us where the ship next touched land. Historians still argue whether the disappearance is the result of poor paperwork, a quiet act of piracy, or something stranger. Roman bureaucrats were notorious for recording grain shipments down to the last sack, yet here we have silence around something far more valuable. Was it negligence? Was it embarrassment? Or did something happen so shameful that officials preferred to pretend the ship had never existed at all? The sea itself, of course, has no need of paper. Out past the breakwater, the wind stiffens, gulls peel away and waves slap the hull with a steady rhythm. The ship pushes forward into open water, its sails tightening against the gusts. To the dockside crowd, it is one of many departing silhouettes easily forgotten by the time the next vessel is tugged into place. But for us following centuries later, this is the last confirmed sighting. A line in the water, a wake that fades, and then nothing. One sailor perhaps cracked a joke to ease the nerves as the horizon swallowed the city. Let's imagine he nudged his companion and said, "If Rome can tax the rain, surely it will try to tax the sea next." They laughed their chuckles, carried away by wind, unaware that history would never write their names again. For the people left in Ostia, life continued. Markets bustled, officials stamped tablets, more ships came and went, but somewhere a clerk may have frowned, weeks later wondering why one set of cargo tallies never matched. Somewhere an officer may have muttered an excuse too thin to withstand questioning, and somewhere in the great swirl of empire a vessel carrying riches and secrets was gone, vanished so thoroughly that even Rome's memory could not hold it. The harbour returned to its rhythm as it always did, and yet beneath that rhythm lingered a disquiet, a story too unfinished to be forgotten. The harbour at Ostia, Rome's lifeline to the sea, breathes like a restless lung. Early morning mist drifts across breakwaters as merchants shout porters heave, and the groan of ropes echoes between masts forest thick in the basin. Ships from Egypt, Spain, Gaul, and even furthermore side-by-side hulls bumping like impatient neighbours. Amid this chaos stands the treasure ship, a vessel far grander than the average grain carrier. Its timbers gleam with fresh pitch, its prow carved with a figurehead meant to awe, and its hold is said to brim with valuables that would make even the imperial treasury blink. They say gold gleamed within amphorae stacked alongside spices, silks, and rare marbles intended for villas that were still drawing up blueprints. Whether all of this is fact or rumour hardly matters. The ship already has a reputation whispered with awe in the taverns lining Ostia's cobbled streets. Mainstream history tells us that Ostia was not just a provincial port, it was Rome's principal harbour, especially vital after Emperor Claudius and later Trajan expanded its facilities to handle the empire's insatiable appetite for imports. Vast grain fleets from Alexandria made landfall here, feeding a city that could starve if shipments stalled for even a week. So imagine the stir when a vessel not loaded with wheat, but with treasure at least by reputation anchors at its quays. Dock workers whisper wagers about whether it carries tribute from the east, spoils from a campaign, or perhaps contraband that senators would prefer to ignore. In an age where rumour spreads faster than cargoes unloaded, the very idea of such a ship is enough to bend ears and stretch imaginations. One quirky tidbit often repeated in accounts of ancient seafaring is that sailors sometimes painted protective eyes on the bows of their ships, believing these would help the vessel see through dangerous waters. Some insisted the eyes could also ward off envious spirits lurking beneath the waves. Whether the treasure ship bore such talismans no one records, but it's easy to picture gaudy painted pupils staring into the horizon, daring fate to blink first. Such details cling to our minds because they humanise the sailors' men who might handle gold and ivory by day, but still sleep with charms tucked under pillows stuffed with straw. Historians still argue whether this fabled treasure ship ever truly existed in the form described, or whether it is a later invention stitched together from fragments of genuine merchant records and an enduring appetite for mystery. Was it one vessel singled out by circumstance, or a composite of several ships remembered as one? The debates rage on each inscription or papyrus scrap pored over, as if it might reveal a hidden ledger line that says simply, "Lost at sea." In the docks, life presses on. Porters curse as amphorae slip in their nets. Officials scribble on wax tablets recording goods duties and names. Sailors patch sails with hands so calloused that needles barely sting them. A ship like this, so heavily rumoured, draws attention not only from merchants, but also from the less savoury side of the harbour. Thieves eye its cargo with envy. Gamblers dream of the fortunes it could bankroll, and priests mutter prayers that it will not tempt the gods to jealousy. Because if there is one lesson Rome's sailors know too well, it is that Neptune's favour cannot be bought, no matter how many coins you toss into the sea. And here we can pause for the first light joke of this section. One dockside wit supposedly quipped that the only treasure guaranteed to leave Ostia's port was the tax collector's cut, which never sank, never vanished, and somehow always grew heavier in transit. His friends laughed, perhaps too loudly, until a clerk appeared to remind them that mocking revenue officials was a pastime best enjoyed in whispers. The treasure ship's departure is planned with ceremony, though not with fanfare fit for an emperor. It waits for favourable winds, its sailcloth inspected, its crew drilled into order. Amphorae are wedged into sand-lined holds to prevent shattering, while wooden chests are nailed down against the rolling that every sailor dreads. Above gulls wheel and squabble as if they sense drama brewing. The ship is readied line by line, knot by knot, until even the harbour slaves feel something unusual about this voyage. Perhaps it's the size of the vessel, perhaps the whispers of gold. Either way, the air tastes charged, as though a storm brews even under calm skies. A second joke sneaks into the atmosphere here. One sailor, seeing the endless supplies crammed aboard, reportedly muttered that Rome had mistaken his ship for a moving villa. All we're missing is a senator in a toga demanding fresh figs. His mates chuckled, though the laughter faded quickly when the overseer barked another order. Humour is relief, but it never lasts long in a place where ropes snap and cargo crushes limbs in the blink of an eye. The sense of tension heightens when rumours ripple through the taverns of Ostia. Some claim that the ship carries temple treasure seized in some distant campaign, its gods furious and hungry for vengeance. Others insist it bears tribute from a loyal client king bound for the coffers of the emperor himself. A few say it is cursed doomed before it even clears the breakwater. For the everyday citizen sipping watered wine, these stories are entertainment. For the sailors climbing the rigging, they are weights on the mind. After all, when waves rise and the sky darkens, it is hard not to wonder whether tales of curses carry more truth than the priests admit. The third joke whispered in darker corners goes like this: if the treasure ship really disappears, don't look to the sea, look to the praetors' pockets. Cynical humour has always been a survival skill, especially in an empire where official corruption is as common as rain. Thus the scene is set. The treasure ship waits in Ostia's bustling harbour, watched by hundreds of eyes whispered about in dozens of tongues. The tide swells, the wind readies, and soon the order will be given to cast off. Whether it sails into fortune or misfortune, none yet knows, but the sense of an omen lies thick like the smell of tar and salt in the morning air. The treasure ship that slipped from Ostia's harbour carries its mystery not only in its disappearance, but also in the whispered accounts of those who claim to have glimpsed its departure. Dock workers later insist they remember a vessel larger than most, a merchant ship outfitted with reinforced hull planks and sails dyed in faint indigo, a colour more costly than the ordinary canvas. Some swear they saw crates stencilled with imperial markings, sealed with wax and guarded by soldiers in helmets that gleamed despite the morning mist. Others suggest the men watching the crates were not legionaries at all, but hired guards from distant provinces, perhaps Numidians or Dacians, whose very presence invited speculation. It is easy to imagine the chatter that spread as the ship cast off a fortune bound for the Emperor's coffers, or perhaps a private hoard disguised as state cargo. Whatever the truth, the ship slides into the Tyrrhenian Sea, and within days both vessel and rumour are swept into obscurity. Mainstream historical fact grounds the scene Ostia served as the principal seaport of Rome during the 1st and 2nd centuries of the Common Era. Positioned at the mouth of the Tiber River, it became the lifeline of the capital, handling grain shipments from Egypt, olive oil from Hispania, and countless other goods vital to sustaining the metropolis. Archaeological excavations at Ostia reveal vast warehouses Horea, where commodities were stacked in quantities sufficient to feed 1 million mouths. The port thrived with an organised chaos, sailors shouting in Greek, or Latin dock workers jostling for wages, and officials tallying manifests with wooden tablets. The idea of a single ship vanishing amid this bustle may seem improbable, but precisely because Ostia was so busy, a disappearance could slip unnoticed, drowned in the tide of constant movement. Historians still argue whether the supposed treasure ship ever existed as more than a tale. The absence of inscriptions surviving, manifests or naval records naming the vessel, leaves the story perched on shaky ground. Some scholars suspect it began as a moral anecdote, a parable spun by later writers about the folly of greed or the dangers of trusting the sea. Others maintain that the fragmentary nature of Roman record-keeping, particularly concerning merchant fleets, means the absence of direct evidence proves little. After all, countless ships sailed from Ostia, and most left behind no permanent trace, unless they sank spectacularly or carried state officials of renown. Still, quirky tidbits surface in the written sources. One fragmentary text attributed to a minor Roman satirist mentions a senator's chest lost to Neptune more costly than his speeches. Though the author's tone is mocking, some readers have linked the remark to the vanished ship, suggesting a senator may have staked his fortune on its voyage. Another obscure anecdote claims the crew carried with them a clay tablet, inscribed with protective charms against storms, an unusual practice for Roman sailors, who more often offered sacrifices at shrines before setting out. If true, it hints at a superstitious edge to the voyage, as though the men sensed they carried more than just mundane cargo. The wider maritime context adds layers to the mystery. Roman merchant ships, often broad-hulled vessels called navis honoraria, were sturdy but vulnerable to sudden squalls and pirate ambushes. While the Mediterranean was far more secure under Roman control than in earlier centuries, piracy never vanished completely. Raiders from Cilicia or the Balearic Islands sometimes resurfaced, and coastal legends warned of opportunists preying on isolated ships. It is tempting to imagine the treasure ship falling into such hands, its crew overpowered under moonlight, its cargo spirited away to hidden coves. But again, no hard evidence ties such speculation to reality. As dusk settles over our narrative, one can picture the ship gliding north along the Italian coast, sails heavy with damp evening air. Lanterns swing from the stern, casting wobbly reflections across the water. Perhaps the crew sings softly to keep rhythm at the oars, their voices a counterpoint to the sigh of waves. The captain, leaning on the rail, eyes the horizon with a mix of confidence and apprehension. He knows the route well, Yet some instinct nags that this voyage carries a different weight. On the deck, guards shift uneasily near the sealed crates, their helmets gleaming faintly in the last light. What lies inside remains sealed, even to them gold coins, religious offerings, perhaps art destined for imperial display. Whatever it is, the sea soon swallows both ship and secret. Light joke number 1 drifts in. Imagine one dockhand muttering that the ship would sail faster if they lightened it by throwing a few senators overboard instead of gold. His companions laugh nervously, careful not to be overheard, for such jokes could end poorly if repeated to the wrong ears. Light joke number 2 might have been whispered by a sailor, suggesting that if Neptune himself taxed cargoes, he must be Rome's most efficient bureaucrat. Light joke number 3 could belong to a bored guard on deck, grumbling that if the treasure were truly valuable, it ought at least to include a few decent cloaks to keep out the damp. These small touches of humour remind us that even amid mystery and speculation, ordinary men still sought levity against the unknown. From Ostia's bustling wharves to the darkening waters of the Tyrrhenian Sea, the story of the vanished treasure ship plants. Its first deep question was this: an actual vessel whose fate we may yet piece together from scattered clues, or was it always a parable of imperial excess? The silence of records leaves room for both, and so the ship sails on in our imagination, lanterns bobbing cargo sealed and destiny unwritten. They step from the bright racket of Ostia's quays into the dim resin-sweet interior of the treasure ship, and the shift feels like passing from rumour into reality. The hull breathes with tiny creaks, pitch smells of smoked pine and garlic, and slants of daylight fall through square hatches like pale ladders. She's no toy, a broad-bellied merchant meant to swallow miles and cargo, at the same time a floating storehouse with ambitions. A mainstream historical fact belongs here. Roman shipwrights of the 1st and 2nd centuries build shell-first locking planks, together with mortise and tenon joints pegged tight, before ribs go in to stiffen the whole. The wood answers like a choir when a palm taps the strakes firm-tuned confident. Above a single great mast rises through the deck like a tree that forgot its roots, banded with iron at the partners, and steadied by shrouds laddering down to the rails. A long yard waits to be swayed aloft, wrapped around a square sail, heavy with lanolin, fleece dents, and faintly sheepish on the nose. Sailcloth this weight keeps wind the way a purse keeps coin. It demands muscle to tame and repays patience. Ropes hang in ordered chaos, hempen lines coiled on pins, some new and honey-coloured, others dark with tar and stories. At the prow, painted eyes stare outward, so the ship may see her water. At the stern, the steering oar's loom gleams where hands have burnished it smooth. Drop below and the world rearranges into holds and passages. The main hatch opens onto a cavern of amphorae nested in sand like eggs in a careful clutch. Each jar bears a maker's stamp, its pointed tip tucked into gritty ballast so it will not wander when the hull heaves. Sizes vary, but a typical transport amphora here drinks 20 to 30 litres, about 5 to 8 gallons, while a few giants hold 40 to 50 litres, roughly 10 to 13 gallons. The treasure itself does not sit bragging in open chests. It hides among ordinary cargo in decoy amphorae with thicker throats and false bottoms, or in cedar boxes wrapped in drab sailcloth that announces absolutely nothing. Forward of the main hold, a smaller compartment corrals the awkward shapes, cedar crates banded with bronze-sealed leather sacks of denarii that clink like hail when nudged, and 2 squat marble altars bound for a seaside villa where someone plans to thank the gods in style. A quirky tidbit dangles from a crate. A tiny bronze fascinum the winged phallus sailors swear will blind the evil eye bobs whenever the hull moves, which is either bold or hilarious depending on your superstition level. A clerk, the ship's walking abacus, sits cross-legged with wax tablets and stylus muttering tallies and threats. One joke sticks to him like burrs. He says he trusts the sea more than he trusts arithmetic done by anybody else, which given his job is very on brand. Amidships the bilge runs like a dark patient vein beneath the planking. 2 men work a wooden box pump with clacking leather valves, shoulders rising and falling to a rhythm older than the language they curse in. What they lift is more rumour than flood a thin brown sigh and the occasional splinter, but everyone listens anyway because dry feet equal long life. Historians still argue whether large Roman merchants routinely carried Archimedes' screws and sophisticated piston pumps, or relied on simpler box pumps and bucket lines. Whichever the device, the heartbeat of bailing is the soundtrack of safety. Even the bravest sailor starts glancing at the pump when the wind swings north, and the chop begins to slap like an unpaid bill. Now the human cargo. On deck, the captain keeps his hands clasped behind his back, as if holding the horizon there by grip alone. He is no senator in sandals, but a professional sun-lined eyes, a policy that begins with wind direction and ends with profit, and a cabin full of small proofs that luck prefers the prepared. He tucks a laurel sprig into the chart case because it once worked a smooth pebble into his pocket, because it looks exactly like a tiny loaf, and a letter from a wife who has requested one last voyage 4 times and counting. If confidence had a smell, it would share a shelf with lamp oil and dried orange peel in his little locker. Beside him, the helmsman hugs the great steering oar, a leaf-shaped blade as long as 2 men laid end to end its loom, bound in rawhide where it rubs the tiller. He reads swells like an augur, reads birds' lips, counting the heartbeats between crests. Eyes soft so they can stay wide for hours. Near the mast, the boatswain runs the deck like a short-tempered priest, blessing and cursing the same line in the same breath, because ropes understand consistency. The sail crew boys, varnished by sun and wind, learn to coax rather than wrestle, since canvas forgives persuasion more than it forgives pride. Light joke number 1 slips by with a grin. The boatswain tells the newest hand that the best knot is the one you can untie half asleep with a pork pie in your fist. The boy is now permanently hungry when he coils lines. People make the ship breathe. The steward rules a kingdom of barrels and baskets bred hard as opinions sleeping in sacks. Olives floating in brine so green it looks enchanted. Salted fish stacked like silver shingles. He doles oil with a banker's suspicion and guards the spice jar as if it were a senator's will. In the galley, a cook with forearms like amphora handles tends a bronze brazier chained to keep it honest. He knows 20 ways to make lentils pretend to be interesting, and 19 involve garlic. Light joke number 2 arrives with the steam. He swears the gods love his stew, because storms always start after he serves it, never before, which proves either culinary divinity or regrettable timing. At the bow, the lower status men sleep in a snug wedge of space deckhands, a cooper's apprentice, 2 hired rowers kept for emergencies, and 1 unhappy soul chained for theft, his sentence commuted to labour afloat. Chains on a merchantman are rare, but not impossible when city courts prefer muscle over quarry stones. They share air with anchor cables and spare sailcloth, and they dream of land that does not sway. A medicus keeps a chest of needles, salves, and optimism. He stitches more pride than skin, and prescribes rest he cannot hand out. He also carries a reed for lancing blisters, and a spare ear for lancing complaints, aft separated by a wall thin as promises the captain's day room shows work rather than luxury. A table with a raised lip keeps ink where arguments put it, a lamp on a gimbal pretends to be steady, and a map sits half unrolled like a sleepy cat. With him sits the owner's agent, a man whose cloak says wealth, and whose sandals say few splinters. The agent wants the earliest possible departure. The captain wants tide wind and omens to agree. They compromise the way sailors and accountants always do by choosing a time that will be wrong only if the gods are paying attention. Light joke number 3 lands quietly. The agent claims his patron owns good weather. The captain replies that the sea refuses to recognise private property. Let the eye drift to spares and tools. Near the stern, iron anchors nest like patient teeth, each several tens of kilograms in weight. Think 30 to 60 kilograms, or about 66 to 132 pounds, wearing burlap shoes so they do not chew the deck. Spare yards lie along the rails, tarpaulins folded like thick grey blankets, and a coil of tow rope fat as a child's waist sleeps beside the capstan. Adzes, augers, chisels, mallets, spare pegs. Everything has a home, because order at sea buys time when chaos comes calling. The longboat rides piggyback over the afterhatch, lashed tight so it will not attempt heroics before it is asked. How big is she truly? Historians still argue whether broad-beamed corbeta like this commonly stretched beyond 40 to 60 metres in length, about 131 to 197 feet, or whether tales of imperial giants make everyone's memory larger than reality. What is certain is simpler. This hull is deep, the beam generous, and the temperament patient. The design favours capacity over speed, safety over sprints. She's built to cradle jars without bruising them, to hold a steady course through a sulking chop, to arrive a day late with everything intact rather than a day early with apologies. And why does every soul aboard have a stake in the treasure? Because every soul aboard is stitched to every other by shares and hopes. The captain's reputation will rise or sink with this cargo. The owner's agent calculates bonuses in his sleep. Sailors expect tips at unloading and steady wages until then. The cook counts on a gratuity if bellies forget they were ever empty. Even the chained man keeps a ledger in his head. Deliver the voyage without incident, and a merciful master might shave years from his sentence. The clerk dreams of balanced accounts and a quiet winter. The helmsman dreams of a wind that keeps its promises. They climb back into afternoon glare, squinting ears full of the ship's private music pump clacks, rope whine, amphora hush, the heartbeat creak of timbers that have learned the grammar of waves. On the quay, drivers curse mules that refuse philosophy. On the water gulls argue the ethics of theft. Somewhere a priest sprinkles salt and murmurs to a god of boundaries. Somewhere else a boy steals a crust meant for tomorrow and eats his future early. The treasure ship waits for tide wind, and the single word that makes a harbour exhale cast off. If she truly will vanish one day, she does not know it yet. She only knows her lines are snug, her cargo sleeps, and every person aboard has already put a little of their heart in the hold. They say the sea has moods, and tonight it sulks. The ship, heavy with crates and amphorae sealed with resin edges out of Ostia's breakwater, into a horizon that looks like a smear of ash and pearl. Oarsmen row in steady rhythm, their backs glistening with salt and sweat, even in the cool evening, while sailors bustle above, tightening ropes, coiling lines, and squinting into the grey. The great hull groans as if reluctant to leave safe harbour, but orders are orders, and this treasure-laden vessel must set sail toward destiny or disaster. A mainstream historical fact here grounds us. Ostia was indeed Rome's bustling port, an engineered marvel with deep basins and artificial moles that allowed hundreds of ships to dock at once. Supplies from every corner of the empire funneled through it, grain from Egypt, wine from Gaul, marble from Greece, oil from Hispania. Any ship slipping from its harbour carried not only cargo, but a fragment of Rome's lifeblood. This particular ship, as later storytellers insist, bore more than grain. It carried coin chests destined for legion pay, perhaps even treasures bound for imperial coffers. The risk was immense, but so was the need. On the deck, officers in russet and indigo cloaks pace like anxious cats. One scribbles notes onto a wax tablet, tallying crates by lamplight, while another checks the seals with fussy diligence, muttering that if even one amphora leaks, he will personally toss the sailor responsible overboard. Quirky tidbit Roman amphorae often had pointed bottoms designed so they could be stuck upright into sand or racks for storage. To the uninitiated, it might look like every potter in the empire was simply bad at flat bases, but in truth it was brilliant design. Amphorae like these now clink softly below deck, cradling oil wine, or maybe something richer, something worth vanishing for. The ship's prow cuts through the surf, yet the mood aboard is uneasy. The sea has its rhythms, but tonight gulls circle lower than usual, screeching like omens. A sailor spits twice, making a quick sign to ward off Neptune's wrath. His comrade chuckles, saying Neptune is far too busy counting the coins slipping through imperial fingers to care about one creaking tub of timber. Still he spits anyway, because superstition travels faster than logic on the waves. Historians still argue whether this voyage ever truly happened as later chroniclers describe it, or whether the tale of the vanished treasure ship is a product of rumour, inflated by centuries of retelling. Was there truly a vessel loaded with imperial wealth that vanished without trace, or was it simply one of countless merchantmen lost to storms, its importance magnified only in hindsight? Yet the absence of records, no arrival noted, no survivor's report, fuels the idea that something stranger occurred. Night settles in, and the sailors light torches at intervals, their flames flickering weak against the dark. The coastline fades, Ostia's lamps dissolving into a faint orange glow that soon disappears altogether. Out here only the stars bear witness. A soldier leaning against the rail glances up at Jupiter's bright glint, muttering a half prayer and half complaint. "If you're listening, maybe send us a clear sky, eh?" his comrade replies. "Careful what you asked last time. I prayed for clear skies. I got sunburned so bad I looked like a boiled lobster." The men laugh, but it is thin laughter, strained around edges of unease. The oars dip and rise until the drumbeat calling cadence falters. A strange hush drapes over the water. No wind bellies the sails, no current nudges the hull. The sea is glass, and glass unsettles sailors more than storms. They prefer the honest violence of waves to the uncanny stillness that feels like a trap. Officers bark for torches to be doused as if the darkness itself demands respect. Somewhere below amphorae knock, softly sounding like distant bones. The silence is broken by a faint creak, not of timber, but of something beyond perhaps another vessel. Eyes peer into the black, but nothing shows. The commander orders a watch, doubled spears at hand, though none can say what enemy might lurk. Pirates. A sudden squall, or perhaps as some would later claim a phantom menace that swallowed ships whole. Quirky Tidbit again whispered with nervous humour. Sailors in antiquity often blamed disappearances on sea monsters, imagining tentacled beasts dragging vessels beneath the waves. One later writer joked that if every monster blamed for lost ships actually existed, the Mediterranean would have been more crowded than a Roman marketplace on feast day. Still, in that hushed moment with fog rolling low across the water, it does not feel like a joke at all. Torches are lit once more this time, not for light, but for comfort. Faces glow red in the wavering fire shadows deepening in eye sockets, until every man looks like a mask. The mast groans as if bending under invisible weight. From the stern, the helmsman mutters that the stars themselves look wrong tonight, as though constellations have slid sideways. Another man insists it is only the wine, but when he looks upward he too frowns. Historians still argue whether this eerie detail comes from a genuine sailor's log later lost, or whether it was embroidered by chroniclers addicted to drama. Yet the feeling persists in every retelling that this was no ordinary voyage. The treasure ship left, Ostia entered the dark and then simply slipped from history. And so, as the night stretches, sailors whisper, officers tally, and soldiers joke through chattering teeth. Every man clings to the hope of dawn when sunlight might burn away shadows and prove the world is still normal. But dawn in these stories does not always bring relief. Sometimes it brings absence. Light joke number 1 on Legionary grumbles that the only monster capable of sinking them is the cook's stew, which seems to be thickening into mortar. Light joke number 2, another suggests that if pirates do attack, they'd better bring bread, because at least then dinner would be edible. Light joke number 3, a sailor staring into the fog mutters, "If we vanish, I hope they at least make us legends. It's better than being remembered as bad cargo." The open sea welcomes no man with softness, and for the sailors of Rome it is never quite tame, even under skies that look deceptively calm. By now the treasure ship has cleared the familiar shoreline its prow, cutting into the Tyrrhenian waters beyond Ostia. Salt spray flecks tunics and beards, and the rhythmic groan of timbers is like the voice of the vessel itself, creaking warnings no one quite heeds. The men on board know this ship is not an ordinary cargo hauler. Its decks are laden with more than amphorae of wine or grain sacks from Sicily. This vessel is whispered to carry valuables meant for the emperor himself, treasures from provinces so far flung that the very names sound exotic. Egyptian glass, Iberian silver spices from Arabia, bolts of silk that shimmer even in weak sunlight. And when a ship like that vanishes, rumour is guaranteed to grow faster than barnacles on a keel. A mainstream historical fact that shapes this journey is Rome's reliance on seaborne trade. Even the greatest roads could not match the efficiency of shipping bulk goods by sea. Grain from Egypt alone fed the bellies of millions in the capital, and the imperial port at Ostia bustled constantly with arrivals and departures. Archaeologists have uncovered warehouses there known as Horia built to store these goods before they were distributed inland. Some were vast, with carefully laid brick floors and traces of painted walls, proof that Rome treated food supply like a matter of life and death. Against that background, a treasure vessel slipping quietly into the waves seems almost ordinary at first glance, just one more hull among many. Yet its absence later strikes like a crack in the Empire's facade. On deck, sailors busy themselves with the rituals of departure. Ropes creak as their coiled sails unfurl with a snap, and the helmsman steadies the tiller with calloused hands. A centurion assigned to guard the cargo leans against the railing, his red cloak damp with sea spray, trying to look commanding while secretly battling the urge to retch. Roman officers prided themselves on iron stomachs, but the sea made no exceptions. Quirky Tidbit, an ancient remedy for seasickness, involved wearing a small pouch of herbs around the neck, sometimes wormwood, sometimes even bits of garlic, though one sailor later joked that it only cured seasickness by making everyone else avoid standing too close. As the ship pushes farther into open water, the coastline shrinks behind them into a low, hazy line. The men exchange glances, aware that once land disappears entirely from sight, the world shrinks to timber sail and horizon. A gull wheels overhead, crying in a tone that to a superstitious ear sounds like a warning. Fishermen mutter that gulls are the souls of drowned sailors always circling where tragedy waits. The legionaries scoff at such talk, but keep their hands close to their weapons anyway. After all, even on a well-guarded ship, danger can come in many forms: sudden storm-hidden reef, or worse, men with ambition and knives who share your deck. Historians still argue whether this ship ever reached its intended port. Some theories suggest it disappeared in a storm off the Ligurian coast, its cargo tumbling into the deep, with not even a single amphora bobbing back to shore. Others whisper of piracy crews from Cilicia, or renegade traders who shadowed fat Roman ships and struck when vigilance flagged. Still others imagine corruption closer to home, with officers staging the disappearance to pocket treasure before filing neat reports of accident at sea. Each possibility feels plausible, yet none is proven, leaving the ship half real, half legend. Below deck the air is close and heavy with the scent of pitch-wet rope, and spices seeping from cracked jars. Lamps swing gently, sending shadows scuttling across barrels and crates. Here the guards pace, counting cargo by torchlight, trying not to think too hard about the rumours whispered before departure. One crate is said to hold emeralds the size of olives, another bolts of fabric woven so fine you could pull a whole length through a signet ring. No one can prove it, of course, but men do not guard sacks of grain this nervously. And when men believe treasure is near suspicion, grows thicker than fog. A light joke makes its rounds on deck that evening. One legionary quips that if the ship sinks, he plans to swim ashore carrying 2 amphorae of wine, one in each hand, because drowning sober would be the real tragedy. His comrades laugh, slapping his back, but their eyes glance nervously at the horizon anyway. Humour is the oldest shield against unease. The centurion, hearing the joke, pretends disapproval, but hides a smile. Even officers know that laughter keeps fear at bay better than stern orders. The night closes in, wrapping the ship in darkness. Stars appear in scattered ranks overhead, though the clouds promise they may not last. Sailors chart positions with practiced glances at constellations, their knowledge inherited from generations who trusted stars more than emperors. The men of the 9th Legion, had they been here, might have recognised the silence of such nights, the pause before something breaks. For now, though, only the creak of rigging and the sigh of waves keep watch. Somewhere below, a mouse scurries over grain sacks, reminding everyone that no cargo, no matter how precious, escapes being nibbled by smaller hungers. And so the treasure ship sails into its first night, its lights faint against the void, its crew uneasy, its guards wary. What awaits them is hidden, whether in storm clouds, pirate galleys, or the deeper mysteries of empire. But one fact is certain when such a ship leaves and never returns: the silence it leaves behind becomes far louder than the waves that swallowed it. Cargo, for all its glamour when painted on frescoes or carved into reliefs, is in reality just stuff. Heavy, awkward, breakable stuff. The treasure ship that sails from Ostia is not an airy legend yet, but a vessel weighed down with amphorae, sloshing with wine oil jars, sweating resin chests of coins that creak as the wood strains and bundles of textiles roll tight. To the Romans, this ship is a floating warehouse, and like every warehouse, it has both its practical marvels and its headaches. Soldiers stand watch to deter thieves, sailors curse as they wrestle ropes thick as wrists, and stevedores grumble that the pain never matches the bruises. Yet beneath all the grumbling lies awe, because every object carried aboard represents more than its weight. It represents the Empire's reach, stretching across seas, binding provinces to Rome, in invisible strands of commerce. The mainstream historical fact here is that Ostia, Rome's great harbour, truly functioned as the funnel through which much of the Empire's wealth poured. Grain from Egypt, wine from Gaul, spices from the east, all passed through its docks, stacked, inventoried and dispatched to the hungry capital. Archaeological remains of massive warehouses, the Horea, still stand their thick brick walls, testifying to how much Rome trusted in storage before shipment. The treasure ship's departure is no accident of scheduling, but part of this vast logistical ballet. Every amphora sealed, every coin chest-nailed, every bale of cloth wrapped, is another line in the Empire's grand account book. And yet, as history proves time and again, even the neatest account books can suddenly sprout blank pages where disaster scribbles instead. Among the crew, superstition hums like a second wind. A quirky tidbit preserved in sailors' tales tells of captains who nailed charms, little lead tablets etched with crude figures onto masts to ward off storms. Some sailors wear amulets of Mercury, god of travellers, while others whisper prayers to Neptune before casting off. The paradox is delicious. Rome, with all its marble temples and lofty philosophy, still relies on tiny charms scratched by men who spit salt water from their teeth and hope the gods are listening. On this treasure ship we can imagine a grizzled boatswain pressing a clay figurine of a dolphin into the hands of a nervous recruit, muttering that the sea respects those who remember its symbols. Whether true or not, such gestures give courage, and courage is as precious as gold when facing the unknown. The variety of cargo offers glimpses of lives far from the sea. Amphorae stamped with vineyard seals whisper of farmers pruning vines under Mediterranean suns. Textiles folded with precision speak of weavers hunched over looms and shadowy workshops. The coins rattling in their chests echo miners sweating in shafts deep beneath Iberian hills. Even exotic spices hint at caravans plodding through deserts, camels swaying under burning skies. Each item embodies a network of toil, hope and exchange. When stacked together in the ship's hold, they transform into more than goods, they become a condensed version of the empire itself. Imagine one sailor leaning against a barrel of Egyptian grain, joking that he now technically holds up the empire's breadbasket with his shoulder. His mate replies that if it spills, he'll single-handedly starve half of Rome. Exaggeration, yes, but it reveals how deeply the men feel the weight of their burden. Scholars still argue whether this particular treasure ship carried imperial taxes, private merchant wealth, or some delicate blend of both. Some imagine it as an official convoy guarded by soldiers who ensured no coin slipped away. Others propose it was a consortium of merchants pooling resources, a floating bank, designed to profit from distant markets. The truth may lie in between, as Rome often blurred the line between state and private venture. After all, the emperor himself invested in cargo ships, while wealthy senators liked to claim they were above trade, even as they quietly funded it. The ambiguity suits the legend. If the ship belonged partly to Rome, partly to private men, then its loss would sting, doubly striking both public pride and private purse. As the ship pushes into the open sea, the crew contends with challenges beyond superstition. Rats scurry among sacks, gnawing holes that sailors patch with curses and wax. The air grows heavy with mingled scents of olive oil, damp wool and pitch. Amphorae must be wedged tight with straw and rope lest they topple like dominoes when waves strike. Even fire is a lurking danger. One spark from a careless lamp could turn the vessel into a torch. The sailors know this, and they live with a constant balance between vigilance and fatigue. It is not glamorous work, but without it, Rome would choke on hunger. Yet the very richness of the cargo makes the ship a beacon for more than storms. Pirates haunt the Mediterranean still, though Rome proclaims victory over them. Sailors glance at the horizon with narrowed eyes scanning for suspicious sails. A coin chest is not merely wealth, it is bait. To guard against this, a handful of soldiers stand ready pillar, leaning nearby shields, polished dull from handling. They joke that they are not soldiers now, but warehouse guards on floating duty protecting jars instead of provinces. Still, they keep sharp for the lure of treasure tempts even friendly ports to treachery. Life aboard is marked by rhythm. At dawn, sailors haul lines, soldiers inspect cargo, and the cook stirs a pot that smells faintly of lentils and too much salt. At noon, the sun sears the deck bakes and men retreat to shade when possible, muttering about cooler days in Spain or Gaul. At night the sea glimmers with stars, and for a moment even the grumbling fades as men gaze upward, humbled by the vast canopy. Somewhere a soldier hums a tune from home, and another joins in the sound, carrying over creaking timbers. These moments remind us that while the ship is called a treasure ship, the true treasure may lie in the threads of humanity woven between strangers, forced to share a fragile plank of wood against a relentless sea. Light joke number 1. One sailor complains that the rats eat better than the crew, feasting on grain while he gnaws stale bread. Light joke number 2. A soldier staring at the endless waves quips that if Neptune demands tribute, he should accept IOUs like every Roman tax collector. Light joke number 3. The cook insists his stew improves every day, but the men whisper that it simply grows new ingredients on its own. These jests, absurd yet comforting, reveal how humour is ballast keeping spirits from capsizing under monotony and fear. By now, the treasure ship has slipped beyond sight of Ostia's harbour, its sails swollen with a cooperative breeze, its decks creaking under weight. The city's noise fades, replaced by gull cries and the eternal rhythm of waves. Rome continues on shore, oblivious its senators, debating its markets, bustling its people, feasting on bread and olives that may in fact be balanced precariously in the hold of this very vessel. For now, the ship sails its fate unwritten, its legend unborn, its cargo safe within the fragile ribs of wood and rope. The mood along the Italian coast grows stranger as weeks pass without a sign of the vanished treasure ship. Merchants whisper of bad omens, fishermen shake their heads at the restless tides, and priests begin to fold the silence into their sermons as if it is a test of faith. Rome itself has not collapsed from the absence of one vessel, but the disappearance feels like a hole cut into the empire's skin. The harbour of Ostia, usually a place of bustle and sound, seems subdued. Sailors mutter that they hear echoes of the ship's departure in the clatter of rigging, as though its ghost has never left the piers. One mainstream historical fact gives this moment its texture. Ostia was Rome's primary port by the 1st century, a massive hub of grain imports, marble shipments and military supplies. Losing even a single large vessel, there was a reminder of how fragile the entire system could feel. The silence spreads into rumour. Some insist the ship was seen off Sicily, others swear it slipped into a sudden storm near Sardinia. A few even claim it reached Carthage but was stripped in secret, its crew scattered to avoid suspicion. Historians still argue whether these rumours represent genuine sightings, confused reports of other ships, or the desperate human need to fill empty space with story. The truth is maddeningly absent. A quirky tidbit woven into this fog is that later, Roman writers sometimes complained about how often officials forged reports of successful arrivals to cover delays. If such paperwork games were common, it is possible the treasure ship was confirmed safe on parchment long after its timbers were already at the bottom of the sea. Imagine a harried clerk in Rome insisting the ship had docked in Alexandria, while in reality the sea had swallowed it months earlier. Meanwhile, the families of the crew are left in limbo. Wives light lamps at shrines, children ask when fathers will return, and no official messenger comes to close the question. The Empire has no insurance office. To pay compensation, only the bluntness of absence. Some sailors' names continue on military rolls, their pay unclaimed, their status missing. For ordinary Romans, the lost ship is not just imperial cargo, it is fathers, brothers and sons. The harbour's taverns carry the ache in muttered toasts. May they be drinking better wine than this wherever they are. Like joke number one sailor's friend grumbles that if the missing crew found Elysium, the gods had better stocked it with socks that never get wet, because that was the real treasure every sailor wanted. Economically, the loss sparks more than sorrow. Merchants in Rome raise their prices citing shortage of imports. Senators quietly demand explanations, their investments tied up in cargo that may never be recovered. The government responds with more patrols sending galleys to sweep the seas. But the wider problem is clear. One lost ship exposes the whole network's vulnerability. A single gap in the chain can ripple all the way from Spanish mines to Egyptian storehouses. Historians still argue whether the treasure ship's disappearance triggered policy changes such as tighter convoy systems, or whether it was dismissed as a freak accident. Bureaucracies rarely admit panic, but the sudden emphasis on coastal defence in the decades that followed hints that lessons were learned, if only grudgingly. In the taverns of Ostia, though, official measures matter less than imagination. Sailors trade theories as though swapping dice throws. One insists the ship slipped into a fog so thick it never emerged. Another swears the captain facing mutiny steered deliberately into unknown waters. A fringe tale even insists that sea gods, angered by unpaid offerings, pulled the vessel into the depths as punishment. Quirky tidbit: Roman sailors often tossed coins into the sea before voyages as gifts to Neptune. If someone skipped the ritual in haste, it may have been remembered after the fact as the cause of disaster. Human beings prefer stories with reasons, even if the reason is divine pettiness. Daily life continues around the gap. At the grain markets in the Forum, borium sellers slap scales down, calling out prices with the same sharpness as always. In the baths, men grumble about cold water and taxes, not about a vanished hull. Yet when someone mentions the missing ship, the room grows quieter, as though all recognise the unease of an empire that cannot account for everything. Like joke number 2, one bather quips that if the lost ship had been carrying extra soap, at least the gods did everyone a favour because the current batch smells like goat. Laughter cuts the tension, but the missing vessel lingers in the back of minds. Archaeological hints make the absence sharper. At Ostia, carved inscriptions record the names of shipping companies, lists of arrivals and departures and dedications to Mercury, patron of merchants. Among them, some stones show gaps where a ship should be named but is not, or where a dedication ends without details. Scholars pore over these fragments trying to match the silence to the lost treasure ship. Historians still argue whether such fragments are evidence of deliberate erasure, simple weathering, or a quiet policy of pretending embarrassing failures never happened. Rome, after all, excelled at boasting of victories and had little interest in publicising mishaps. As seasons shift, the lost vessel begins to take on mythic proportions. Street performers weave it into tales of cursed treasure, of golden statues that sank under the waves because they belonged to temples, not emperors. Children play games where one group pretends to be sailors, the other to be waves that swallow them whole. Absence turns into theatre, and the longer no wreckage is found, the more the mystery grows. A quirky tidbit remembered centuries later is that some medieval writers believed the lost ship still drifted beneath the surface crew, alive trapped in eternal night. Such legends say more about the persistence of story than about waterlogged timbers. For the Empire's administrators, however, patience wears thin. Officials stamp reports, demand accountability and shift blame. Some accuse pirates, others whether others' incompetence. The debates ripple through senatorial chambers like distant thunder. Like joke number 31, senator famous for his dry wit supposedly remarked, "If pirates took it, may they kindly return the receipts which earned him laughter from colleagues and fury from merchants." Humour again masks the deeper wound Rome depends on its ships, and one missing vessel exposes how fragile even a mighty empire can be. So the treasure ship's absence endures recorded not in neat lines of history, but in silence, rumour and whispered prayers. The empire carries on, the markets reopen, and the harbours bustle once more. Yet the vanished hull becomes a ghostly companion haunting every departure from Ostia. Sailors glance at the horizon and mutter protective charms. Merchants check their ledgers twice. And somewhere in Rome a clerk still scratches his stylus across wax, writing an arrival that never happened. The story of the vanished treasure ship already wrapped in salt air, and rumour now drifts into the realm of folklore and myth, where memory blurs and invention takes root. Sailors are natural storytellers. Give them a mug of wine, the creak of timbers, and a captive audience, and the tales will multiply like barnacles on a pier. By the time generations have passed since the ship slipped away from Ostia's busy harbour, the factual details have faded, replaced by larger-than-life accounts that would make even the sternest historian crack a smile. One evening version tells of a captain who angered Neptune himself, the god of the sea, and was dragged down in a whirlpool that swallowed both crew and treasure. Another insists that the cargo never sank at all, but was hidden away on some forgotten shore guarded by locals who quickly realised they had stumbled on a fortune too great to announce. Mainstream historical fact grounds us in this era. By the 2nd and 3rd centuries, Roman maritime trade stretched across the entire Mediterranean, from Alexandria to Carthage, from Massilia, modern Marseille, to the harbours of Hispania. The grain fleets of Egypt alone were so essential to Rome's survival that emperors personally oversaw their protection, knowing that a hungry city of 1 million citizens could turn volatile in days. Against that backdrop, the loss of one ship, however precious its cargo might have been routine. Yet as with the 9th Legion or other vanishing acts in Roman history, what is routine can become extraordinary when paperwork grows faint. The lack of surviving ledgers turns a simple mishap into a tantalising riddle. Meanwhile, quirky tidbits emerge from the record of Roman superstition. Ancient inscriptions note that sailors often carried amulets shaped like little phalluses called facina, believing these would ward off envy and the evil eye. Imagine then the treasure ship's crew stuffing their tunics with these charms, confident that they had outsmarted cosmic ill will, only to vanish without trace. It is the kind of irony that would delight a poet armed with talismans of luck undone by the sea that laughs at such trinkets. Some late writers even suggested the ship was cursed precisely because of its wealth, the gods unwilling to allow so much gold and silver to pass safely into mortal hands. Folklore has a way of layering exaggeration upon exaggeration. By the Middle Ages, chroniclers far removed from the Empire's glory days were writing of a golden galleon that slipped out of Ostia and sailed straight into the mists of the otherworld. These accounts are laced with anachronisms. Knights in shining mail suddenly appear in tales about Roman sailors, and Christendom is woven into stories centuries too early. Still, the persistence of the tale shows how human minds cling to mysteries. A lost ship filled with treasure is simply too delicious an image to abandon. Every harbour town wants to claim a piece of it. Some say it lies buried under dunes near Ravenna. Others whisper it reached the shores of Britannia, where the gold was used to bribe chiefs into uneasy peace. Historians still argue whether the treasure ship was ever more than an embellished version of a routine loss. Some suggest it was a state vessel carrying taxes or tributes whose disappearance would have been embarrassing enough to erase from records. Others argue it might have been a private merchantman swollen with speculative cargo whose owner inflated its legend to excuse financial ruin. The scholarly debates are often as heated as the tales themselves, with papers that read less like calm analysis and more like gladiatorial contests staged in academic journals. And lurking behind it all is the truth that we may never know whether the ship even existed beyond rumour, or whether it was a composite myth born from dozens of routine sinkings merged into one golden narrative. At sea, the story becomes a cautionary tale. Sailors whisper it while tightening ropes, warning each other that greed can make a hull heavier than stone. Remember the ship from Ostia, one says the one so rich he thought herself unsinkable. Another snorts and replies, unsinkable ships always sink. It is the first law of Neptune. The line earns a laugh, but it carries the weight of bitter experience. Every crewman knows that fate can turn with the roll of a wave. The Ostia tale becomes their reminder that the sea owes no one safety, not even Rome at its height. From a storytelling angle, the myth is perfect fodder. Ancient Rome loved moralizing tales, parables about hubris punished discipline, rewarded fortune's wheel spinning. The missing treasure ship fits seamlessly into that tradition. Its disappearance is not just a logistical mishap, but a cosmic lesson. Was it lost because men grew arrogant, because Neptune demanded a toll, because fortune delights in irony? The absence of hard fact allows every listener to supply the moral most convenient to them. One joke slips naturally into this sea of rumour. Some modern scholars half-jokingly suggest the ship did not vanish at all, but was simply late. Given the Mediterranean's unpredictable winds and the snail-like speed of a cargo vessel under unfavourable currents, a 2-month delay could have been enough to spawn whispers of disaster. By the time the poor captain finally arrived, salt-encrusted and weary, he may have discovered that in Rome his ship was already a ghost story. It is a reminder that bureaucracy moves faster than sails. Another light-hearted take: if the ship truly carried fabulous treasure, the sailors might well have been tempted to accidentally beach it on some secluded shore and retire in luxury. Imagine the awkward roll call in Ostia, yes prefect. We simply mislaid a few thousand gold coins, a handful of pearls and several amphorae of wine. These things happen. The mental image brings a chuckle, even as historians shake their heads at the unlikelihood. But the fact that such jokes persist tells us how deeply the human mind delights in imagining secret fortunes buried just out of reach. As folklore grows, the treasure ship joins the ranks of other legendary vessels, the Flying Dutchman, ghostly armadas seen by storm-tossed sailors and cursed fleets whispered about in every port. Though the Roman tale predates them, it slots neatly into the same pattern. A vessel that vanishes becomes more powerful in memory than it ever was in reality. The Ostia ship is not just a cargo carrier anymore. It is a mirror for fears of loss, for longings of sudden fortune, and for the eternal tension between human ambition and the sea's indifference. And so the legend sails on. Each retelling adds new embellishments. Skeleton crews glimpsed through fog treasure chests that glow faintly beneath waves, even ghostly horns that echo through the mists at Ostia's harbour when the wind is right. None of these can be proven, yet none of them die, because the absence of finality is precisely what keeps the tale alive. If the treasure ship had simply arrived or simply sunk, it would be a line in a ledger. Because it did neither, it became a story, and stories have far longer voyages than ships. The treasure ship's story, after drifting through centuries of rumour scholarship and folklore, finally settles into the wide, echoing chamber of memory, where history and myth mingle without boundaries. At this stage, the vessel ceases to be a single wooden hull, and becomes instead a symbol of absence of possibility, of the power of questions left unanswered. Rome itself, that great machine of marble and discipline, eventually crumbles. Ostia's bustling quays fall silent under sand and time, but the tale of the ship that slipped away refuses to crumble. It endures not because we know what happened, but because we don't. Mainstream historical fact offers a clear anchor here. Ostia, founded as Rome's principal port, thrived as the entry point for grain, wine and goods that sustained the empire. Archaeological digs at the site reveal warehouses, mosaics of merchant ships, and even a lighthouse foundation that guided fleets into safe harbour. The harbour itself silted up over time, replaced eventually by the grander portus built under Emperors Claudius and Trajan. These details remind us that Ostia was real, tangible and vital, the heartbeat of Rome's supply chain. Against this backdrop, the vanishing of a treasure-laden ship feels even stranger, like a missing cog in a machine otherwise designed to record everything. Yet the quirky tidbits that cling to the legend prove just as irresistible. One Renaissance chronicler swore that fishermen outside Ostia sometimes hauled up golden coins in their nets, claiming they came from the lost ship's hold. Modern historians dismiss these tales as fanciful, but the image is delightful. A weary fisherman shaking free a wriggling catch only to find a coin stamped with an emperor's face glittering with salt. It is the sort of detail that keeps a mystery alive even when evidence evaporates. Historians still argue whether the story deserves the weight it carries. Some label it nothing more than a late invention spun from the routine losses that plagued ancient trade. Others insist the persistence of the legend suggests a kernel of truth, a real disappearance magnified by time and imagination. The debate remains unresolved, which may be the most fitting outcome of all. For if the ship were definitively found, neatly explained, catalogued and displayed in a museum, it would lose the very aura that makes it captivating. A solved mystery becomes an exhibit, an unsolved one remains a tale. The allure of the lost ship rests in its refusal to be pinned down. Scholars trace inscriptions and tablets, divers probe Mediterranean depths, storytellers weave novels and films. Each effort adds another layer, another ripple in the water. The ship itself may be gone, splintered, silted, or mythical, but the curiosity it inspires sails on. And so the 9th Legion of the Seas, this phantom fleet of one, joins the ranks of history's great unanswered questions. Its presence lingers in absence, a lesson that sometimes the gaps are more intriguing than the filled lines. Light joke number 1 surfaces here. If the ship really did sink, imagine the exasperated Roman clerk forced to update the ledger. Lost one vessel, 3,000 amphorae, several tons of silver, and my career. Light joke number 2. If the ship was merely delayed somewhere, a captain must have muttered, "Well, at least they'll remember us," not realizing how literally true that would become. And light joke number 3. If the sailors deserted with the treasure, they must be the most successful early retirees in history, though retirement packages are rarely this dramatic. And now, with all threads gathered, the tale leans into its final drift. The wind down begins slowly, like waves easing after a storm. The pacing softens the edges, blur, the tone folds into calm. Picture the ship again, sails billowing as it leaves Ostia's harbour. The sun glimmers on the water, and for a moment everything looks certain. Destination fixed, crew prepared, cargo secure. But as the vessel slides into the horizon, mist thickens and its outline wavers. One blink and it is gone. The silence left behind is not frightening now. It is soothing. No splintering timbers, no frantic cries, just the calm erasure of distance, the kind that carries stories far beyond the reach of oars. Inhale with the rhythm of waves long and steady. Exhale with the hush of forgotten shores. The Roman Empire itself passes into twilight. Its armies disbanded, its marble cracked, its legacies scattered. Yet this one mystery endures quiet as a whisper, soft as a lullaby. It does not demand resolution. It asks only to be remembered gently, like a dream half kept. The image fades further. Ostia's piers sink beneath sand ivy cloaks, ruined walls. Fishermen's nets drift empty under a silver moon. Somewhere perhaps a coin gleams in the mud, or a fragment of amphora waits for a curious hand. But for now, the story rests. The treasure ship sails no longer across waves, but across imagination. And in that calm sea of not knowing peace is easier to find. The unanswered questions do not press for urgency. They lull the mind, instead reminding us that history, like sleep, works best when not everything is forced into clarity. So let your thoughts drift with the vanished ship. Let the quiet deepen. The past has given you its gift, not certainty, but wonder. Close your eyes, soften your breath, and allow the silence of the centuries to cradle you. The treasure ship is gone, but the calm it leaves behind is yours to keep. Sweet dreams.